They say that land is the only thing that lasts, but they never tell you how easily it can be stolen by the ones you love most. For 50 years, my family's apple orchard was my entire life. It was where I worked side by side with my late wife, Martha. It was the sacred ground where we scattered her ashes. It was my legacy. But to my daughter, Lexi, those 50 acres were nothing more than a paycheck. She saw me struggling with my arthritis and offered to help with the management. I trusted her. I was a fool. She secretly sold our history for $2,500,000. She did it all just to buy a designer wardrobe and a penthouse in the city. I was left with nothing but a small apartment and a broken heart. But Lexi made one fatal mistake. She forgot that my grandfather was a man who looked deep into the future. He left me a legal secret in the water rights that would turn her brand new life into a pile of ash. Before I reveal the shocking way I reclaimed my power and left her picking up trash on the side of the road. I would love to know which beautiful state you are watching from today. Please share your city or state in the comments below. The air in the state of Washington always smells different in October. It is thick. It is sweet. It is heavy with the scent of ripe galas and honeycrisps waiting to be picked. To most people, 50 acres is just a number on a map, but to me, it was my heart. It was my lungs. It was every breath I have taken for the last 70 years. This orchard began with my grandfather. He came to this valley with nothing but a handful of seeds and a back that refused to break. He survived the Great Depression on these trees. My father survived the wars in these trees. And I survived the loss of my soul on these trees. My wife, Martha, was the true spirit of this place. She had hands that could make anything grow. She used to say that trees are like people. They need to be listened to. They need to be respected. We spent 40 years side by side, pruning in the winter frost and picking in the golden sun of autumn. When the cancer took her 5 years ago, I knew exactly where she belonged. I remember that morning vividly. The sun was just peeking over the Cascades. I took her ashes, and I walked to the very center of the orchard. There stands an old, gnarled tree we called the Great Matriarch. I scattered her there. I watched the grey dust settle into the dark, rich soil. Martha became the dirt. She became the sap. She became the fruit. Every time a breeze moves through those leaves, I hear her whisper, "It is a holy place." It is also the place where my daughter, Lexi, took her very first steps. I can still see it. A little girl in denim overalls reaching for my fingers. Her tiny feet wobbled on the uneven ground. She laughed as she tumbled into the clover. I picked her up and told her, "One day, Lexi, all of this will be yours to protect." I thought she understood. I truly did. I thought she felt the heartbeat of the land under her feet. But looking back now, I realized she was only looking at the dirt as something to be washed off. She did not see the soul. She only saw the price tag. She did not see the 3 generations of sweat. She only saw a way out. The land is patient. It waits. It gives. But I have learned the hard way that blood does not always value the soil it came from. My Lexi, she was my greatest harvest, and she became my most bitter crop. Time is a thief. It steals your strength. It steals your quickness. By the time I turned 72, my body began to rebel. My hands, once strong enough to snap a branch, were now twisted by arthritis. The joints were swollen. They looked like the knotted roots of the trees I loved. Some mornings I could not even hold a pen to sign the delivery receipts for the harvest labor. That is when Lexi started coming around more often. She had moved to the city years ago. She always looked so polished, so expensive. She smelled like perfume, not like the earth. But she was my daughter. When she sat at my kitchen table and saw me struggling to open a jar of jam, her eyes softened. Or at least, I thought they did. "Dad," she said. Her voice was as smooth as silk. "You have worked hard enough. You have earned your rest." She started talking about the paperwork, the taxes, the employment contracts for the pickers. It was all becoming too much for me to handle alone. She suggested a simple solution. She said we should make her a co-owner of the property. It is just for the management, Dad, she told me. She leaned in close. She took my swollen hand in hers. It will make things so much easier. I can sign the checks. I can handle the lawyers. You can just sit on the porch and watch the sunset. You deserve that peace. I remember looking at her. I felt a surge of pride. I thought I had raised a woman who cared for her father. I thought she was stepping up to save the family legacy. I did not see the way her eyes darted toward the manila folder on the table. I did not see the cold calculation behind her smile. One afternoon, she brought over the documents. We sat in the living room. The sun was hitting the old wooden floorboards. I took the pen. My hand was shaking. I had to grip it tight. I signed my name. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I felt safe. There, Lexi whispered. She tucked the papers away quickly. Too quickly. She stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the orchard, but she was not looking at the trees. She was looking at the horizon. I noticed a rolled-up map sticking out of her designer handbag. It was a colourful map. It had bright lines and zones marked out. It did not look like an agricultural map. It looked like a blueprint. Is everything okay, Lexi? I asked. Everything is perfect, Dad, she replied. She did not turn around. Everything is finally going to change. I trusted her. I believed in the bond of father and daughter. I believed that a signature was a promise of care. I did not know that I had just handed a chainsaw to the person I loved most. I did not know that the peace she promised was actually the silence of a graveyard. It started as a low hum, a vibration in the floorboards of the farmhouse that I felt in my very bones. At first, I thought it was just a heavy harvest truck passing by on the main road. I sat there in my kitchen, sipping my morning coffee, looking at a framed photo of Martha on the mantel. But then, the hum grew into a roar. It was a mechanical, hungry sound. It was the sound of iron meeting earth. I set my cup down. My hands were shaking, not from the arthritis this time, but from a cold, creeping fear. I walked out onto the porch, and my heart stopped. A yellow excavator, a giant metal beast, was crawling through the north gate. Behind it followed a crew of men in hard hats. They weren't wearing the flannel shirts of orchard workers. They were wearing the bright vests of a construction crew. I watched, frozen, as the machine approached the great matriarch. That was the tree. The one where Martha rests. The one where the best apples always grew. I saw a man spray a bright red X on its trunk. It looked like a wound, a bloody, jagged mark. "Stop!" I screamed. I tried to run, but my knees buckled. I stumbled down the porch steps, waving my arms. "What are you doing? This is private property. Get off my land." The foreman looked at me with a face like stone. He didn't even turn off the engine. He just held up a piece of paper. He shouted over the noise that the land had been sold. He said they had a permit to clear the site for a new luxury development. He said the owner had signed the papers 2 days ago. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. The owner? I was the owner. But then, I remembered the signature. I remembered the smile Lexi gave me when I signed that co-ownership deed. I pulled my phone from my pocket with fumbling fingers. I called her. I called her 3 times before she finally picked up. "Lexi." I sobbed. I couldn't help it. The tears were hot on my face. "Lexi, there are machines here. They are marking the matriarch. They are marking your mother's tree. Tell them to stop. Please tell them there has been a mistake." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the city noise in the background. Honking horns. Wind. The sound of a life that didn't belong in the dirt. "There is no mistake, Dad," she said. Her voice was cold. It was flat. It was the voice of a stranger. "I told you things were going to change. I sold the 50 acres to a developer from Seattle. I felt the air leave my lungs. You sold it. Lexi. This is our legacy. This is your mother's resting place. How could you sell our soul? Legacy doesn't pay for Chanel, Dad." She said it so casually. like she was talking about the weather. I am 28 years old, she continued. I have spent my whole life surrounded by mud and trees and the smell of rotting fruit. I'm done. I sold the property for $2,500,000. $2,500,000. Do you have any idea what that buys in the city? I already have a penthouse. I have a wardrobe that actually fits the life I was meant to lead. I have a stylist. I have status. You sold your mother for a closet full of clothes? I whispered. I could barely get the words out. Don't be dramatic, she snapped. The trees are just wood. The dirt is just dirt. I've already arranged for a small apartment for you in town. It's clean. It's modern. You won't have to worry about the frost anymore. Just stay out of the way, Dad. Let the professionals do their job. The line went dead. I looked up just as the excavator's arm swung back. The metal teeth bit into the great matriarch. I heard the wood groan. It sounded like a scream. A long, slow, splintering scream. The branches that had shaded my daughter's first steps were shredded in seconds. The trunk that held Martha's ashes in its roots was pushed over like it was nothing. The dust rose in a thick grey cloud. My history, my wife, my pride. It was all being turned into a pile of debris. I stood there in the middle of the driveway, a broken old man with a useless phone in his hand. I realized then that I hadn't just lost my farm. I had lost my daughter. She had traded the solid, honest earth for the glitter of a designer label. She thought she had won. She thought $2,500,000 made her invincible. But as I watched the dust settle on my boots, I remembered something she had overlooked. I remembered the one thing my grandfather told me never to sell. She had the land. But she didn't have the water. And in this valley, without the water, the land is just a grave. Moving day did not involve a celebration. No friends were bringing over apple pies. There was no laughter. There was only a cold, professional moving crew hired by Lexi to clear out what they called the clutter. They packed 50 years of my life into cardboard boxes in less than 4 hours. I was moved into apartment 4B. It was a small, sterile unit on the edge of town. The walls were painted a color the landlord called eggshell, but to me, they just looked empty. There was no smell of wood smoke or wet earth here. There was only the faint chemical scent of lemon floor cleaner and the constant, low hum of the refrigerator. In that apartment, I felt like a ghost. I would sit by the window and watch the cars go by on the asphalt below. I was a man who was used to looking at the horizon. Now my view was limited to a brick wall and a dumpster. People in town meant well. I would walk to the small grocery store to buy a single carton of milk, and I could feel their eyes on me. They would whisper behind their hands. That is the man who lost the orchard, they would say. Poor soul. His own daughter sold him out. The pity was worse than the silence. It felt like a heavy coat that I could never take off. Lexi did not call. She was too busy being reborn. I didn't know much about the internet, but the lady who lived in apartment 4A showed me Lexi's social media page on a tablet. I saw pictures of my daughter that I didn't recognize. She was standing on a balcony overlooking the city skyline. Her penthouse had floor-to-ceiling windows and marble floors that cost more than my first tractor. She was wearing a dress that cost $5,000. She was holding a champagne glass and laughing with people who looked as shiny and hollow as she did. In one post, she wrote a caption that said, "Finally living the life I was born for. No more dirt. No more heritage. Just style." It hurt to breathe when I read those words. She saw our family history as dirt. She saw the 3 generations of sacrifice as something to be washed away. She was surrounded by $2,500,000 worth of things, but she was spiritually bankrupt. She had everything. And yet, she had nothing at all. One rainy Tuesday, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the apartment was ringing in my ears. I decided to go through the one thing the movers hadn't touched. It was an old cedar box that had belonged to my grandfather, Elias. It was the only thing I had managed to carry to the car myself. I sat on the floor and opened the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and old paper filled the room. It was the first time I felt like I could truly breathe since leaving the farm. Inside were old black and white photographs. My father, as a young man. Martha, on our wedding day. And at the very bottom, there was a thick, yellowed envelope tied with a piece of twine. I untied the knot with my aching fingers. Inside were the original deeds from 1934. I began to read the fine print. I read about the boundaries. I read about the easements. And then, I saw it. My grandfather was a man who understood the laws of the West. He knew that in a valley like ours, land was important. But water was life. He had filed a separate deed, a deed for the senior water rights to the natural spring that fed the entire 50 acres. I sat there, frozen. I read the words, again and again. The land belonged to the owner, but the water rights were held in a private family trust. A trust that I controlled. A trust that had never been part of the sale. Lexi had been so focused on the $2,500,000 that she never looked at the water rights section of the title report. The developers were building a massive shopping mall. They were planning fountains. They were planning luxury bathrooms. They were planning a complex that would require thousands of gallons of water every single day. And I was holding the key to the faucet. I looked at the picture of my grandfather. He seemed to be winking at me through the faded ink. I realized then that I wasn't a ghost. I was still the steward of this land. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what this meant. Without my permission, those developers couldn't even mix a bag of concrete on that property. Lexi had sold the dirt, but I still owned the soul of the valley. I closed the cedar box and leaned my head against the eggshell wall. For the first time in months, I smiled. The rainy Washington night felt different once I had that yellowed envelope in my hands. I sat at my small kitchen table in apartment 4B, the light from the single overhead bulb reflecting off the plastic tablecloth. I read those papers until my eyes burned. I read them until the legal language started to make sense in my soul. My grandfather Elias was not just a farmer. He was a man who understood that in the American West, the land is a body, but water is the blood. He knew that one day, people might come for the dirt. He knew that the valley might change. So, he did something brilliant. He did something that most people today are too hurried to even notice. He had legally separated the water rights from the land deed back in 1934. In the eyes of the law, the 50 acres of dirt belonged to whoever held the title. But the rights to the natural spring, the senior water rights that fed every pipe and every irrigation line, those belonged to the Elias Miller Family Trust. And I was the sole trustee. I didn't sleep that night. I waited until 8 o'clock the next morning and called my old friend, Arthur. Arthur was a retired property lawyer who had spent 40 years defending farmers in this valley. We had played poker every Friday night for 2 decades. I went to his office carrying the cedar box like it was a chest of gold. Arthur put on his reading glasses, the ones that sat on the very tip of his nose. He went quiet. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on his wall and the rustling of old paper. Finally, Arthur looked up. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. A slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. "John," he said. His voice was gravelly but firm. "Your daughter Lexi might have sold the stage, but she forgot to sell the actors. She sold the land for $2,500,000, but she sold it as a clear and developable title. That means she promised the developers they could build whatever they wanted." I leaned forward. My heart was thumping in my chest. "And can they?" Arthur let out a dry laugh. "They want to build a luxury shopping mall, John. They want fountains. They want public restrooms. They want air conditioning systems that use thousands of gallons of water. But according to these papers, they don't own a single drop. You own the water. Every gallon. Every pint. Every tear." He tapped his finger on the desk for emphasis. "The city will never grant a building permit without a secured water source," Arthur explained. "The developer is likely sitting on a pile of debt right now, waiting to break ground. If you refuse to lease them, the water rights, that project is dead. It is worse than dead. It is a desert." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. It wasn't a shiver of fear. It was a shiver of justice. Arthur told me that the developers would eventually realize their mistake. They would look at the title report and see the gap. They would see that the family trust held the power. They are going to come to you, John, Arthur warned me. They will offer you money. They will offer you millions to sign a waiver. Or they will go to Lexi and realize she lied to them about having a clear title. I looked out the window at the grey Washington sky. I thought about the great matriarch tree being torn out of the ground. I thought about Lexi's laugh as she talked about her Chanel wardrobe. I don't want their money, Arthur, I said. My voice was as steady as a mountain. I want them to understand that some things are not for sale. Arthur nodded slowly. He understood. In that moment, the ghost of my grandfather Elias felt very close. He had reached out from 1934 to give me a weapon. Not a weapon of hate, but a weapon of truth. The ghost in the deed was finally waking up. 3 weeks later, the silence began. I took a bus out to the edge of the property. I stood by the chain-link fence that the developers had put up. Usually, the air was filled with the sound of engines and the crashing of timber. But that day, it was quiet. The big yellow excavators were sitting idle. The workers were leaning against their trucks, smoking cigarettes and looking confused. The machines had stopped. The house of cards was starting to wobble. Arthur had told me that the developers had finally hit the water wall. They had applied for their final construction permits, and the city had denied them. The reason was simple. No water, no mall. I went back to my apartment and waited. I knew the phone would ring. It happened at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening. I saw Lexi's name flash on the screen. I let it ring. And ring. I wanted her to feel the silence that I had felt in that empty apartment. On the fourth call, I finally answered. Dad? Her voice was different. The cold, polished tone was gone. There was a crack in it. A tremor of panic. Dad, are you there? I'm here, Lexi, I said calmly. Dad, there is a major problem with the paperwork, she said. She was talking fast, tripping over her words. The developers, they are threatening to stop the payments. They say there is an issue with the water rights. They found some old trust from great-grandpa Elias. They said, I don't have the right to provide water to the site. I sat back in my chair. I looked at the cedar box on my table. That is correct, Lexi, I said. You sold the dirt. You didn't sell the water. I hold those rights in the family trust. But Dad! She nearly screamed. I already spent the first $500,000. I have the penthouse lease. I have the clothes. I have social commitments. You have to sign the transfer. The developers sent me a document. It's a simple waiver. I'm sending a courier to your apartment right now. Just sign it, so we can move on. No, I said. The word was small, but it felt like a boulder. What do you mean, no? She sounded like she couldn't breathe. Dad, if you don't sign this, they are going to sue me. They said I breached the contract. They said I guaranteed a developable title. They are talking about fraud, Dad. Fraud. You did commit fraud, Lexi, I said quietly. You told me you were helping me. You told me you were protecting the legacy while you were secretly signing away our history. You lied to the developers. And you lied to your father. I am your daughter, she wailed. How can you do this to me? I'm going to lose everything. The penthouse, the wardrobe, my reputation, everything I worked for. You didn't work for any of it, I replied. You stole it. You stole Martha's resting place for a pile of silk and a view of the city. Please, Dad. She was sobbing now. It was the sound of a spoiled child who had finally hit a wall she couldn't climb over. Just sign the paper. I'll give you some of the money. I'll buy you a better place. Just sign it. I looked at the telephone cord. I thought about the 3 generations of sweat that had gone into that soil. I thought about the trees that were now just piles of mulch. Legacy doesn't pay for Chanel, Lexi, I said, repeating her own words back to her. And water doesn't flow for thieves. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her hollow apologies. I slowly moved the phone away from my ear. I could still hear her tiny, muffled voice screaming, "Dad!" from the receiver. I pressed the button. The line went dead. The house of cards had officially collapsed. Lexi had sold my trees for a moment of fame, but she had forgotten that without a foundation of truth, everything falls. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the rain hit the window. I wasn't happy. There is no joy in watching your child fail, but for the first time since the day the trees fell, I felt at peace. Justice was coming, and it was as cold and clear as the spring water in my grandfather's deed. They say that when you build a house on sand, the tide will eventually come to claim it. But Lexi didn't just build on sand. She built her life on a foundation of betrayal. The 2 years that followed the collapse of the orchard deal were a slow, agonizing descent for my daughter. I didn't see her during that time, but I heard the echoes of her downfall through my old friend Arthur. Every few months, Arthur would come by my small apartment with a file under his arm and a look of grim satisfaction on his face. The legal battle was not a single event. It was an avalanche. The developers from Seattle were not just businessmen, they were sharks. They had invested millions into the planning, the permits, and the equipment for that shopping mall. When the project stalled because of the missing water rights, they didn't just walk away. They sued Lexi for every penny she had. They sued her for breach of contract. They sued her for misrepresentation. They even went after her for fraud, claiming she had intentionally hidden the trust documents to secure the $2,500,000. Arthur told me that her high-priced city lawyers were eating through her money like termites in an old barn. She was paying $300 an hour, then $500, then more, just to keep herself out of a jail cell. First went the penthouse. The bank foreclosed on that marble-floored palace in the sky less than 6 months after the lawsuit began. I heard she moved into a cramped studio, and then into a cheap motel. Then the friends went. Those shiny, hollow people she had toasted with champagne. They vanished the moment the checks started bouncing. They didn't want to be seen with a woman who was being dragged through the local newspapers as a land scammer. But the hardest part for Lexi, Arthur said, was the auction. To pay for the settlements and the mounting legal debt, a court-appointed receiver seized her entire designer wardrobe. I can only imagine her standing in that cold, grey room as strangers poured through her life. Women in sensible shoes bidding $50 for a handbag she had paid $5,000 for. Men in suits cataloguing her silk dresses like they were just pieces of scrap metal. Arthur told me about one specific moment. He had been there to represent the interests of the family trust. He saw Lexi standing in the corner of her empty apartment on the day of the final move-out. She was wearing her very last Chanel jacket. It was a beautiful thing. Soft wool. Gold buttons. It was the symbol of everything she had sacrificed for her family for. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror that hadn't been packed yet. She looked at herself for a long, long time. She smoothed the fabric over her hips. She touched the collar. But her face, Arthur said her face looked like a mask of ash. She realized in that silent room that the jacket couldn't talk back to her. It couldn't offer her a seat at a kitchen table. It couldn't tell her it loved her. It was just a piece of clothing, and it was no longer hers. By the end of the second year, the $2,500,000 were gone. Every cent. It had been swallowed by the court, the developers, and the lawyers. Lexi was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a court order for 300 hours of community service. She had traded the soil of her ancestors for a wardrobe of vanity. And now the vanity was gone, and she was left standing in the cold, hard wind of reality. I sat in my apartment, looking at the cedar box. I felt no joy in her suffering. I only felt a deep, quiet sadness for the little girl who used to walk in the clover. She had forgotten that the most expensive clothes in the world can't hide a poor character. And the earth. The earth always remembers who has treated it with respect. It was a Tuesday morning in late April. The Washington air was crisp, and the cherry blossoms were starting to show their faces in the local park. I had taken to walking there every day. It was my way of keeping my legs moving and my mind clear. I was walking along the perimeter of the park, near the highway, when I saw the orange vests. There was a crew of about 10 people. They were spread out along the grassy embankment, picking up the trash that people had thrown from their car windows. Plastic bottles, old fast food bags, cigarette butts. One of the workers was lagging behind the rest. She was using a metal claw to reach for a crushed soda can in the bushes. She moved with a heavy, exhausted limp. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her skin looked sallow, like she hadn't seen the sun in months. When she straightened up and wiped the sweat from her forehead with a dirty glove, I stopped. It was Lexi. She didn't see me at first. She was staring at a piece of wind-blown trash. She looked so small, so fragile. The girl who had once looked down her nose at the dirt of our farm was now knee-deep in the filth of the city. Then she turned. Our eyes met across the chain-link fence. She dropped her heavy orange trash bag. Her metal claw fell to the ground with a dull clang. Her lip began to tremble. "Dad?" she whispered. I didn't move. I stood there, leaning on my cane, watching her. "Dad, please," she said. She stumbled toward the fence. She reached out with her gloved hand, her fingers gripping the cold wire. "Dad, I'm living in a shelter. I'm working these hours just so I don't have to go to prison for the unpaid fines. I haven't had a real meal in weeks. I'm your daughter. Please. I'm your only daughter." Her voice was full of a desperation that was painful to hear. It was the sound of someone who had reached the very bottom of a dark well. I looked at her. I looked at the orange vest. And then I looked past her. I looked toward the horizon, where the orchard used to be. The mall was never built. The land sat empty now, a scarred patch of earth where my trees once stood. "I remember the day the machines came, Lexi," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the morning air. "I remember the sound of the great matriarch splintering. I remember you telling me that legacy doesn't pay for Chanel." "I was wrong, Dad," she sobbed. "I was so wrong. I don't care about the clothes anymore. I just want to come home. Please, take me home." "There is no home to go to, Lexi," I replied. "You sold the house. You sold the barn. You sold the memories." "But the money from the water," she gasped, her eyes widening with a sudden hope. "Arthur told me the developers paid the trust a huge settlement just to release the easements so they could sell the land to the state. There must be millions in that fund. You could use that to help me. You could buy us a new place." I shook my head slowly. "That money doesn't belong to me, Lexi. And it certainly doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the family trust. And as the trustee, I have already made a decision." I walked a step closer to the fence. "I am using every dollar from that settlement and every cent from the water rights to fund the Last Harvest project. As we speak, a team of arborists is on that land. They are cleaning the soil. They are removing the concrete. And next week, they will begin planting 5,000 new apple saplings." Lexi's face went pale. You're planting trees instead of helping your own flesh and blood?" "I am helping the only thing that was ever honest with me," I said. "I am healing the land you destroyed. I am giving the valley its soul back. Those trees will be a forest for the next generation. They will be a sanctuary for people who value the earth. That is the only legacy I have left." I looked at her one last time. "You said you were tired of living in the dirt, Lexi. Well, now you're cleaning it up. I think this is a good way for you to learn what the earth is truly worth. It isn't something you buy or sell. It is something you earn." I turned my back on the fence. "Dad! Dad, don't leave me here!" she screamed. But I didn't look back. I walked away, my cane clicking rhythmically on the pavement. I felt a strange sense of lightness. The weight of the betrayal was gone. The weight of the anger was gone. As I walked, I could almost smell it. It wasn't the smell of city exhaust or trash. It was the faint, sweet scent of apple blossoms. It was the scent of Martha's smile. It was the scent of a new beginning. I realized then that you can't plant a life on a foundation of greed. You can't hide a poor character under expensive silk. But if you are patient, if you are faithful to the soil, The land will always give you one last harvest. And this time, it would be a harvest that would last forever. As I sit by my window and watch the sun begin its slow descent below the horizon, I feel a peace that I haven't known in a very long time. My apartment is small, but the air feels clear. The noise of the city seems to fade away when I think about that 50-acre stretch of land. The sounds of the excavators and the crashing of ancient wood have been replaced now. They have been replaced by the quiet, rhythmic sound of shovels hitting the earth. 5,000 saplings are being tucked into the soil today. They are small, they are fragile, but they have something that my daughter's penthouse never had. They have deep roots. They have a future that is connected to the truth of the earth. I think about Lexi often. I pray for her every single night. I do not pray for her to get her designer clothes back. I do not pray for her to find another $1 million. I pray that as she picks up the trash of strangers, she finds the pieces of her own soul. I pray that she realizes that a legacy is not something you sell. It is something you grow. It is something you protect with every bit of strength you have left. To those of you watching today, many of you are like me. You have spent 40, 50, or even 60 years building a life. You know the value of a hard day's work. You know the weight of a promise. And you know that our children do not always see the world through our eyes. But remember this: the truth always has a way of rising to the surface. Just like the spring water in my grandfather's deed. Justice cannot be buried forever. You cannot plant a life on a foundation of greed and expect to harvest anything but sorrow. I want to thank you for walking this long and difficult road with me. Your support means more than I can say. If this story touched you, or if it reminded you of the importance of your own family heritage, please give this video a like. It helps our community grow. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Elderly Stories. We believe that the wisdom of our years is a treasure that should never be forgotten. Before I go, I have a question for you. I would love for you to share your heart in the comments below. What is the one family tradition or piece of land that you would never, ever sell? What is the legacy you want to leave behind? I will be reading your stories, and I look forward to connecting with you. Until we meet again in the next story. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And most importantly, take care of the land. God bless you all.